Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Great to see you again this morning. A little bit blurry, but I think that's my own doing, so the less said about the better. Yesterday we heard a lot about disruptions, the challenges facing supply chain and logistics in 2021. And sadly, we also heard that this is a trend that's set to continue. This new never normal, this instability and uncertainty is going to go into 2022 and beyond. But for me, as a part of the discussions, there was at least one shining light, or two: data and technology. So with its ability to create stability amidst the uncertainty and improve visibility across the supply chain, data could hold the key to making life that little bit easier. So I'm delighted to have three experts joining me on the panel here to help me crack the code and understand all those ones and zeros and ones and zeros. I've lost my train of thought. Please welcome on the stage Andrea Basinski, Manager of Global Logistics Engineering and Planning at General Motors, and Nitin Sehi, Director of IT, Business Engagement and Transformation at tier supplier Vistian Corporation, and Kannan Ramachandran, Chief AI and Commercial Officer at award-winning technology provider Athings. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
So I'd like to kick off a little bit because I think what's going to be really great to set the scene is a real-life case study, so a real journey. We hear about digital transformation, so I'm going to hand over to Andrea, who's going to talk us through a few slides about what GM's experienced and what they've done over the last year with their inbound logistics.
Yeah, and the story we really wanted to tell was our journey kind of through the COVID pandemic, and how we saw the different phases of how we had to react to the different ways that COVID was impacting us in terms of manufacturing. So we really started out in a phase where we were pre-pandemic. It was, exploding in China. We had to figure out, the Chinese suppliers had all really shut down, and we were trying to bring them back up. And we were trying to figure out, how do we do that, and how do we get all our freight across the ocean? We moved into phase two, which was, after we had all shut down here in the US and we were trying to bring all the plants back up, and how are our suppliers reacting here in the US, and how are we going to get that freight moving? And then the third stage is really where we are now. There's constant change in our network. We're dealing with capacity issues, we're dealing with slowdown issues. We're trying to figure out how we can get those early warning triggers so that we know we need to change something in our network quickly so that we can move our freight and make sure that we're keeping production moving. Do you have the slides?
Yeah, I think we've got some slides if perhaps we're maybe having some technical issues. There we go.
There we go.
Thank you.
And we're going to go to the next slide. Okay, and so these are the three phases that we had to keep changing and adjusting the way that we looked at the different networks that we had. So if you go to slide 2, the next one. So at the start of the COVID pandemic, we had our suppliers shutting down. We were causing a bunch of bubbles in our supply chain. So we wouldn't ship for a couple of weeks, and then we'd be able to start shipping again. We had capacity shortages in air. We were constantly changing our COVID procedures because nobody really knew what those COVID procedures needed to be. So our questions that we needed to answer is, where do we need air and premium, and how do we need to use that to fill that pipeline back up? How are we affecting our specific parts and our specific plants? And when we need to try to fill in those bubbles, what level of production do the suppliers need to do in order to close that gap? So we used our parts requirements information, our inventories, to really kind of figure out what type of premium do we need? So how much air are we going to need for the next month or two? How many charters are we going to need for the next month or two? Can we use other premium modes instead of those? Can we move on faster services? Can we move direct and truck out of ports that gives us a faster transit time? We actually were able to manifest our parts by mode based off of the need in plant and when they needed to be in the manufacturing site. And we also simulated based off of different supplier fill rates to see when were we going to close that gap. So if they could produce at 10% higher, 20% higher, when would we find it? When would we be able to close those bubbles that we had? You can go to the next slide. So as we started our North America restart, we had brand new logistics questions that we needed to answer, and we moved on to kind of our domestic freight, because originally we were affecting all the overseas suppliers, and now it's affecting pretty much everybody. So we have to look at, domestically, a lot of very similar things, just with much shorter timelines that we had. So how do we restart all of our production? What suppliers are going to be able to produce for us? Because they had different restarts at different stages. And we also had a lot of the same questions. So what type of premium do we need? What type of fill rate are we going to be able to expect from the suppliers that are all trying to start up with very different COVID procedures that are going to affect their production capacity? So again, we focused on our requirements, our inventories, what we're actually shipping, and I worked out a way to figure out what is our fill rate from all of our suppliers, and how can we use that fill rate to project when we're going to actually need to use premium modes in order to get those suppliers into the plant. You know, at this point, everybody's trying to produce every single vehicle that they can because we've been down for so long, and we really wanted to make sure that we kept production moving and didn't have the gaps in production and gaps in supply that would be impacted by those suppliers. You can move on to the next slide. And then the third phase is really, like I said, it's today. We have continuing supply chain risk across everywhere. We have capacities, issues in truck, in ocean, in air. We have various countries that will shut down with little to no notice. We have to figure out where are all of our parts, what parts are going to be required at certain times. How do we figure out the impact of a delay and how a delay would impact the rest of the network? And can we predict that earlier so that we have more time to make decisions on what type of premium we're going to end up having? So we've created dashboards that show us the health of the network. That's an early warning system trigger that helps us figure out which parts are going to be affected first, and really track which parts we have under priorities to figure out if we need to do something different with those parts in particular. And we're really tracking every single KPI we possibly can that will give us that early warning trigger. And really, we're continuing, and we have to continue to refresh, we have to continue to look at this data in order to make those really good decisions that give us the ability to be able to make those decisions and get the premium moving and keep the production line going. Okay.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you, Andrea. And just sticking with this and with you, and I'll also mention to our audience, if you do have questions, please do use the app. That's a little sneak preview of what's coming next. But if you, you can use the app and get your questions in to our expert panel. I'll be monitoring those as we go. So, Andrea, back to you. With this project, how crucial was it to move at pace? So I've heard of digitalization projects that can take 1, 2, 5 years for major organizations.
Yeah, the types of questions we need to answer tomorrow. We can't wait. We can't allow things to trigger, because then we're going to have a brand new set of questions and need a brand new set of data. And so, the fact that we were able to kind of week over week come up with new solutions and move very, very quickly really kind of led to everything that we've been able to do.
And in terms of your expectations and results, are you able to share in terms of how it's performed so far and what you're expecting as this project develops?
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't calculate ROI or anything at the beginning. We saw it as an imperative, right? We need to have the data. We need to be able to make those decisions. But what we're seeing is that we can make decisions at 20 days where we used to make a decision at 10 days. So we're giving ourselves a lot more time to come up with better solutions and really focus on what we actually need to do. And, we see paybacks in months, if that.
Wow, yeah. And in terms of scalability, and which is something I'm sure we'll delve into, but specifically for this, are there opportunities at GM to go broader than the inbound side of things?
We really focus on what are the questions we need to answer first, and then where those questions need to be answered. So you can see we said let's do domestic, let's do intercontinental, and let's focus where we need to for the questions that are pertinent to what the situation actually is. So yeah, we can expand almost anywhere, just making sure we're focusing on those logistics questions.
Excellent, thank you, Andrea. I'd like to turn to you, Nitin. Welcome to the stage, and thank you very much for being here. So I'm sure to many of our audience, IT support involves someone telling you to turn your computer off and on again. But I know there's a little bit more to it, and what you're leading at Vistian in the IT organization. Can you elaborate on some of the projects and how you're supporting supply chain logistics?
Sure, Richard. I think IT has moved a lot from on and off switches. The way I look into it is it's becoming more of a digital or a key backbone to a business, right? When we talk about a digital transformation, the way I look into it is it is a kind of a three-leg stool with data, a technology, and a process. So now in the modern world, data, which is kind of equivalent to a decision making from business, and so is the technology, something is now ownership of IT. So unless and until you collaborate and collaborate with the IT to get that framework doing, like what we saw, as Andrea was also mentioning, in last 12 to 18 months, it was a firefighting where business is being continuously reacting to the changes, supply chain conditions, whether it's on the demand side or the supply side, and taking a decision which has to be very fast and it has to happen at lightning speed. So that's where the value of IT was being coming, where we are getting business, working along with the business and getting them all the data which is required, making sure that there is the right pipelines developed through our different systems, making sure that you have a right technology, whether it's in data lakes or putting in a cloud, and providing the data and the dashboards which can help them out. And the second piece around this is now, another facet which we have seen in the last 12 to 18 months is the cyber security, right? Once we start connecting all these machines, putting the data on a cloud, and there was being so many incidents over the course of the last 12 months, which was ransomware, people were just taking the companies for a strike. So that's where the IT is becoming more and more prominent out there to make sure that we are playing that supportive role where we are providing all the data, but making sure that all the data is secure, it is being compliant with some of the security standards. So that's where I'm seeing, in fact, going forward also, I definitely see now IT being that are kind of a key stakeholders sitting shoulder in shoulder with business and helping that carving out both business strategies as well as taking out some of the decision making versus what they used to do before was more of a laggards where they are only providers of a hardware and the network.
Well, yeah, and hopefully that'll move you out of the basement as well of all the offices.
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah.
And up with everyone else. So, yeah, fascinating insight there as to what you're doing. Thank you for sharing. And let's introduce my last but not least guest, of course, Kanan, working with A-Things. So perhaps you can just tell our audience a little bit about A-Things and how digitalization can create stability amidst uncertainty from your perspective as a technology provider.
Sure. Thank you, Richard, and thank you. Nice meeting you, Andrea and Nitin here in this panel. So things, we are in the business of solving complex supply chain problems, right? And it all starts with data for us. So when you talk about what's in digitization, how it could solve problem, it starts with data, and everybody talks about data. And for us, that is very critical, and we agree with that. And it's all about how we bring different elements of technology solutions, process, repeatable methodology, and subject matter expertise. We bring all of them together, and we help customers transform, innovate, and generate sustainable cost savings. That's very important as well. So as they're looking at how to transform the organization, that's also looking for opportunities to become more efficient and save costs. So we help customers achieve those objectives as well using our solution. So that's kind of where we focus. And for us, digitization starts with data, and then we bring in our other elements of our solution, be it AI, machine learning, optimization. We bring them to bear to solve and work on customers' business problems.
Oh, fantastic. So, Nitin, I want to jump back to you, and joking aside about having IT in the basement and being moved onto the floors with everyone else, How is the IT organization starting to interact with logistics and supply chain? You're saying that IT is becoming a key stakeholder and a key partner with these decisions. Are they logistics and supply chain approaching you saying we have these problems, or is it the other way around where you're spotting gaps where you can support them? How does that collaboration work?
No, that's a good question out there, and I think in our organization, especially with we being a tier 1 automotive company, and I think very much in conjunction with how automotive is now marching on, they are becoming more of a systems and solutions company. And plus, how you have seen the last 18 months with all the supply chain issues and chips issues. So what we have done kind of a unique in our organization, we are kind of running a bimodal organization. So there is an organization which is more of keeping the systems on, and there is a part of my organization which is kind of have a dotted line reporting to, in fact, I report directly to CFO. So we are kind of that cusp between the IT and a business, and we get involved ourselves at more of an onset of a problem. So when the business is kind of brainstorming the kind of a business problem they're having, we as my team goes in and start collaborating with them and see how the technology and some of the tool sets which we have in the markets, or there is some technology which we already have there where we can go up and build some homegrown solutions, can help them out to address the business problems. So that's, I think, is, as I said earlier also, we are kind of moving from that laggard way of style to be more becoming proactive, and now kind of holding a chair out there in that overall boardroom along with the business when they are taking up some of their forward key strategic decisions out there.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned going from reactive to proactive, and Andrea, you mentioned at the beginning it was out of necessity, so very much reactive, and it seems like it continues to be. Is the plans to transition to be proactive?
Of course, and I think that, speaking of kind of that partnership between IT and like a logistics supply chain, we do see that as a real partnership, because we can't go further without having the 3 pillars that you mentioned. We have to have the people in place, we have to have the process in place, and we have to have the technology that kind of matches up to all that and really does help us make those decisions.
And Kanan, from your perspective, you're supporting customers. Again, is it reactive? Is it always firefighting, crisis? Or are there some opportunities to look ahead and say, right, what can we do better in an ideal world? Do people have that time? Or is supply chains so challenged right now that it's just firefighting?
No, we strongly believe in putting in the foundation not only to solve problems of today, but also anticipate problems of tomorrow as well. So our solutions are not only helping customers solve firefighting today, but they become more predictive, we become more prescriptive. So we give recommendations to customers for different scenarios, like Andrea was talking about, right, to simulations. What if this happens? What if this happens? What is that, if this particular supplier or this particular footprint? There are different scenarios in supply chain that we look at and start becoming proactive, so the customers have the ability to predict and see what's happening, what could happen in their network, and also look at recommendations in terms of, for them to achieve certain business outcomes, what are the options, what can they be doing? Our goal as a company is to help customers navigate to what we call as an autonomous supply chain model. It starts with data, turning on the data, giving them the visibility into the data so that the organizations can become data-driven, but then with good quality of data as well, because that's very critical. We talked about data, we talked about disruption. We don't want our customers to make decisions with incorrect information, right? So we are all about how we can increase the accuracy of the supply chain business decisions. So that's what we do, and we take them to the different stages of that data visibility, becoming data-driven, becoming more predictive, so they can go into an autonomous supply chain model.
Yeah, interesting. And perhaps Andrea and Nitin, I want to talk about legacy systems now. We don't have all day, but to give all your gripes, but we know that there's challenges with new technology, but how are you overcoming these? Is technology advancing to the point where it's becoming seamless, or are there still kind of barriers out there?
There are still definitely barriers out there. We exchange data. Sometimes that data exchange is a little bit harder just because of legacy systems, and it's hard to get some of the data out, and it's hard to get it out clean sometimes. And so the focus for us first is to let's make sure that we at least know where the errors are, or we have clean data in order to get that moving. Otherwise, anything that we try to make a decision off of just isn't going to work. So we do a lot of exchanges that are a little clunky sometimes, but we're always working to try to make those better.
And I think to me, I think a legacy is a kind of a misnomer, because with now the advancement of technology, system becomes legacy pretty soon. Maybe it is because it was not being thought properly, or there is a different technology has come in and now that system is kind of becoming an obsolete, or your business has grown now in a different direction and that has become so obsolete. So so it's like not a more age of you are having those blue screens who stays for another 15, 20 years and now you're calling them legacy. The life cycle of the systems today with the dynamism which you have in a business, both from a technology perspective as well as from systems perspective, is so changing that the life cycle of a system as per se has been coming down. That's the way I see it is. But the reality is that there is going to be a coexistence between the new technology and the new systems which are going to work on versus some of those legacy which you have to start there. And I think to your earlier point, how do you prioritize, right? And that's where you have to build up that kind of a business value and a business case, that how much disruption you want to bring in a system and the business value that replacement or the new investment does it. Because every new system is going to have a technology, people, money, everything is going to get involved, right? So you have to really make a right judgment on what is the business value you can go up and get it by putting up a new system or maybe a wrapper around it with some of the new technologies which are coming up. You can go up and extract the data and maybe can transform it out of the system and let that system be more of a transactional system or to capture certain information. So I think that's where you have to make a right judgment there.
Yeah, absolutely. And in amongst that, there's potentially a level of human resistance as well, resistance to change with the adoption of new skills required. So that in itself can be another challenge for an organization to face as they go along that journey. Kanan, I want to turn to you, and we know that you work also with non-automotive companies. How does the take-up of technologies like AI, machine learning, cloud platforms compare to automotive, that of other sectors? What are some of the lessons learned?
See, the problems that we encounter across all industries at a high level, they all seem very similar, right? I mean, they also have supply chain disruptions. They need to have their set of manufacturing. We work with life sciences industry, so they have medical devices that they need to manufacture. So it's an element of manufacturing and associated supply chain. We work with retail manufacturing. Again, there's manufacturing supply chain, but where it becomes really different is the consumption model of what they're manufacturing, right? So when you look at retail, there's an omni-channel presence out there. Different types of delivery happen. So when you talk about the type of issues they encounter, some of them are really more on the left-hand side of the supply chain that we've encountered, meaning that more on the forecasting side, more on the production scheduling side. So we find ourselves solving more supply planning, production schedule planning, and demand forecasting type of problems there. Not to mention, once you do that, there's still an element of logistics complexity in terms of getting the right SKU at the right place so that they're more efficient, they're able to go after the revenue opportunity that's on the table. So we address things a little bit differently because they have problems on different side of the supply chain, but at a high level, everybody faces the same kind of challenge and disruption. It's a function of where the priority is and how we align to that priority.
Yeah, interesting. So we have a question come through from the audience asking to give one or two examples of surprises that came out of your what-if scenario analysis around COVID restart planning and how you learn from them. So I guess that's aimed probably at you, Andrea.
Yeah, what was interesting is we had come out of a strike, so we had a lot of lessons learned even just from that startup that we applied to this. And I think some of the surprises that we found were, seeing which suppliers were able to produce and which suppliers weren't able to produce, noting that was kind of cross-country. There was no like specific trend of which ones were, which ones weren't, understanding what and really kind of working with our partners in supply chain to make sure we understood how those, how we were getting parts in, because we would see fill rates at really low levels, but we were still able to manage production. So we needed to work with them and create processes there that didn't exist before in order to have those conversations.
Great, thank you. Nitin, in terms of building solutions to support the supply chain, how are you balancing, say, your in-house solutions versus bringing in outsourced support, be it off the shelf or custom built, working with different partners? How are you doing that and approaching that?
No, I think that's a great question. So for us, right now, I think in the market space, we are being looking into it, right? The people factor is the key. So for a tier 1 automotive supplier where IT is not a competency, it's very tough to go up and get the people and build that kind of a skill set in-house. So we typically tend to outsource. And another thing which I think is being, as you were mentioning before also, is a people change factor, right? It is very tough for people to go up and transform or change their mindset on how they do today versus how the things are happening tomorrow, and more in alignment with how the industry best practices are. So what we have seen works best out there is to go up and take some of the SaaS products or some of the out-of-box products, which are kind of tightened out, and I'm assuming some of those products, like if you go with the bigger companies, they put up a lot of R&D dollars, and they are putting up a lot of industry best practices in the product itself. So you have a kind of a win-win situation where you are kind of forcing your people to transform to the way the new product is bringing those best practices, and challenging themselves out there to think differently what they do today, and that I think is a key to seek out the efficiencies and bring the change in our organization. And from an IT perspective also, it reduces the overall maintenance and overall running cost of maintaining that application and continues to develop it out there. So that's the kind of a strategy we are adopting in our organization.
Great. So we've got three very different perspectives here: the OEM, tier supplier, tech provider, coming from different organizations within those types of company as well. So I'd like to get an understanding, maybe a very short debate on how close we are to achieving end-to-end visibility of the supply chain. So let's go with the end customer first, from your perspective.
I think we're probably closer than we ever have been, for sure, right? And we've done things where we've put AI in very specific locations to be able to see some things a lot better than we have before. And end-to-end is hard. It's to understand what you think of what the beginning is and what you think of the actual end is. And so we have end-to-end in certain spaces, we don't have end-to-end in others. And I think that, we're probably, still quite a ways away from like having that true, like everything that we want to know at our fingertips. But having the pieces, we're pretty close.
Yeah, interesting.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we have seen how customers are innovating and transforming, and it's all about connecting the value chain. And we see that customers have the need for visibility, but I think where customers are getting really good at is defining that end in mind. So what is end to end, right? End to end, because supply chain is so vast. So end to end meaning what? So once we are able to define that, what is end to end for that customer and what are the priorities? So when you say end to end, is from transportation, sourcing to visibility to execution to planning, that's one end to end. But then you want to connect the value chain, look at the supplier, the inventory, and look at all your plant operations and see how your direct material sourcing comes to play. That's another version of end to end. But the key to all that is integrations and having good quality of information. As long as we are able to integrate and bring in good quality of information, we will be able to get end to end, I would call it integrated, contextual visibility. That is what is more important, so that you know what is happening within your network at that point in time so you're able to understand and get good value out of visibility.
And is that a reality? From my experience in these conversations, there's a lot of fragmentation, even within organizations, let alone across the supply chain.
We have to break functional silos, and that's where the data visibility comes in, start working, so go through that maturity process. I think customers are more willing to do that right now because of the disruption. The disruption is forcing accelerated transformation as well. So you have to start thinking differently. You have to start accelerating at a rapid pace. Like Andrea mentioned, you don't, and you also alluded to that point earlier, that you don't have a 2-year, 3-year roadmap to go do all those things. You got to solve your problems, at the same time look at opportunities to continuously innovate, optimize, and transform. It all starts with breaking down the functional silos, connecting your value chain, defining what end-to-end means, and start turning on that visibility for your organization.
And I'll say that we had a very unique opportunity at the beginning of the pandemic when we were building ventilators to really break down silos, because we needed to make decisions so quickly. And that has continued through semiconductor crises and things like that. But without some of those things happening, I agree. It's hard to see that the transformation would have occurred as quickly. That opportunity for us to break down those silos quickly was really actually worked well for us.
And I think that, Richard, either way I look into it is it's a journey. So it's like you can't define what the end-to-end is, right? The definition of an end-to-end 2 years back or 3 years back was, okay, I will go up and connect my freight providers. I will go up and connect my suppliers. So now when you are connecting your suppliers, maybe you are now getting into one more level of data, right? Now you're talking about the GPS coordinates, or that you're talking about the location tracking. So how the technology, it's being astonishing how the technology is moving forward, and the amount of data and the granularity of that, you can go up and now start tracking it out. That is being kind of evolving all your requirements and the needs there, right? We used to have a EDI where you used to get all your customer and supplier demands out there. People were satisfied with that 3 years back, right? Now you're saying, no, that is not sufficient. I require more of even in transit out there, which I need to go up and track it out. Now we are investing a lot of on RFIDs, where we can go up and track all the GPS information where my freight carriers are. So I will say it's a kind of a journey which you are going to embark on it and continues to march on it as going forward. So in terms of maturity level, it's going to be very relative to say, are you reaching to the 90%, or you are there, you have involved that nirvana of the word. So I think that's the way I look into it.
Great, thanks. And, I was hoping for a little bit of a fight, but I'll settle for that. So, I touched earlier a little bit on the human side of things, and I'm interested, again, I'll pick on you, Andrea. Since bringing this project online, have you had to adapt your skill set and that of your colleagues since introducing this new program?
I'm not sure we've adapted our skill set so much as we've had to adapt to different processes, right? So we have typically been in a state of constant change anyway. We pride ourselves on, I think, on transforming and trying to change the way that we look at things on a regular basis. And I think we've built a team that really appreciates that. And so we've had to step into different processes. We've had to step into different areas that we haven't looked at before. But the team is very adaptable, and really it's all about bringing them in to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, to make sure that they're a part of that change first.
I think I will, maybe coming from an IT perspective, and I think challenging it out, I see that as definitely the challenge. I think getting our users to adopt that change is not an easy task, because one thing is it's very tough for people to come off their comfort zone and start doing the things which they are not been doing earlier. And another thing which is being happening, as Karan is saying, it's kind of fizzling those boundaries which were there between different people. So people were starting, initially they were, the way I look into it, a lot of people, 80% of people were more of collating and collecting the data, and then rest 20% were only decision making. Now with the technology and some of the things, that collection of a data is becoming more and more easier and inseamable out there to the people, right? So that's where it becomes a challenge out there. So people factor, I'll say, is a key thing to take that mindset of the people and building that kind of the other key thing which I want to bring it is bringing that kind of a rushness out there to say, yes, I have to go up and adopt a change, and there is urgency to that. I think that is something which I always see very challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not the first time in this event that we've heard that there's a need for a new mindset. I believe it was Ford on the panel yesterday talking about redefining freight network management. There needs to be a change in mindset into how we approach that, specifically on the digitalization side as well. So another recurring theme that we're seeing come through. As we get to the close of the panel, we still have a little bit of time, but I'll just double check and make sure we have any questions coming through from the audience. There's still time if you do want to get one, squeeze one in before we have a quick break. Canon, can you just share some of the insights on the customer journey towards autonomous supply chains? A little bit of how that process and the role that you're playing in that.
So let me, start, defining what our vision of autonomous supply chain is, right? I mean, we are in the automotive logistics, so it is very apt to use all the autonomous, analogies that happen in the vehicle, right? Today you have vehicles with all kinds of sophisticated technologies. When you deviate from a lane, it gives you indicators to get you back into the lane. It tells you if you're very close to another vehicle in front of you, it gives you the signal, blind spots, you name it. You have just about every signal that's coming from your vehicle to nudge you, give you that early warning signal to keep you in the lane. We think autonomous supply chain can and should do it, because we are getting into a paradigm of, customers want to know what happened and why it happened. So it's good, right? So they're getting into what happened, why it happened. But as we get into predictive and prescriptive type of insights, the next paradigm is, can we automate some of those business decisions? It all depends on the maturity curve. So when certain business decisions get automated, depending upon how mature that particular process area is, or when we start getting early warning signals with respect to efficiency, with respect to cost leakage, with respect to out of mode, with respect to inventory shortages, when you start getting those alerts and signals that are being looped back into those various systems and people that are managing that particular process, then you're slowly walking into and getting into that whole autonomous supply chain paradigm, because you are sending signals. You're not waiting for somebody to tell you that, have you looked at it, but you're teasing out that information, giving those recommendations, so the organizations are able to take that action appropriately. For us, autonomous supply chain also means that it's not just you let AI and ML, run without any governance or process. We always believe in augmenting human intelligence with artificial intelligence. That's kind of the key thing. As one of my favorite quotes from my customer, he always says, Kanan, machines give you the answer, but humans need to validate it still. So I strongly believe, we talk about autonomous, we talk about AI, ML, but I definitely want to make it very clear that it's very imperative, the subject matter expertise, the change management that Nitin and Andrea were talking about. Those are all very critical for organizations to have a successful autonomous supply chain model.
Yeah, fascinating there. And just sticking with this, maybe turning to you, Andrea and Nitin, final decision making. So it's clear that digitalization, digital tools and technology are enabling better decision making and faster decision making, but is the final decision making process still manual? And do you foresee that being the case for X number of years to come?
I mean, I would say ours is, for the most part. For the most part, we're taking the information that is provided to us. You could see that, like when I mentioned that we had the parts manifested based off of which mode we thought they should go. At the end of the day, a human made that decision as to whether or not we were going to move forward with that plan. I would like to see a point where we kind of break that, but that takes a lot of validation, a lot of belief, and work to be able to get everybody to agree that that's the right way to go. So it's going to be a while.
Okay. Well, I'll be sure to ask you the question again next year on the panel. But Nitin, from your perspective?
I think the way I look into it, and I kind of echo some of the things which Kanan mentioned. The way I look into is today, I don't want to go into that nirvana of autonomous right now, but if I can have an environment where 90% of my time is being invested on decision making and 10% in the data collection, and then taking that decision in a timely manner and passing a loop feedback to the other departments and then giving a right reaction time to react, I think that will be a good win. Today it's vice versa, because we spend almost 80 to 90% going up and collecting the data, and then the time to react and making that decision making is so low that people are always in a reactive mode. So before we go up and hand over our kingdom keys to machine and saying, okay, you go up and take it, we don't require any more human, I think if we go up and start using human intelligence and give them all those data points, I think that will be a good win-win for everybody as of now, or at least for next few years. That's how I look into it. We still have a long way to go on that side.
So the good news, ladies and gentlemen, is you'll all still have a job next year. Maybe that's not good news, depending on your point of view. We're out of time, and I can see people are probably getting thirsty, ready for their next coffee. So I want to say thank you to my panel. So please join me in a round of applause.